I'm Alex Hirsch, the voice of Beardy the Manitar.
And I'm Jason Ritter, the voice of Dipper.
Dipper versus Manliness. Okay, so this, just to get it out of the way, this episode... Mike Rienda, who does some of our commentaries and one of our writers, if I have to mention it because even though he's not here, I can hear him yelling it from off camera. Just in my heart, I know he would want me to say this. That this episode almost killed me. Like, I was so frustrated with how this episode came out. And
really?
Yes. And in retrospect, I don't have a problem with it. There's a lot of great gags. It's a lot of sweet moments. This episode was one of the very first episodes we wrote. And it was one of these things where we were still figuring out the tone of the series. And what is the reality of this show? You know, if there's a spectrum where on one end you have X-Files, which is real and scary and spooky, you know, and on another end you have something like Fairly Odd Parents, where it's colorful and cartoony, and it has that sort of Peabody and Sherman, like it's silly, right? Like in my mind, I wanted this show to have a level of groundedness and level of reality, and a sense that everything that was magic had some kind of connectedness to the overall story. And so when we broke this episode, because this episode absolutely was pitched out by me, I was like, I think it would be fun to do an episode about puberty and about Dipper getting his first chest hair and about Dipper trying to figure out what that means. You know, when I was a kid, I was a late bloomer. I was the shortest kid in my 6th grade class. Like, I had a squeaky little voice. And, you know, I think boys are always encouraged to become men, and you don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a source of conflict. And in retrospect, I was like, I was seeing it as a source of as a source of conflict and comedy. And that's the thing we're looking for these episodes. And these ideas of these characters who exemplified this sort of over-the-top and, in fact, dangerous and counterproductive but alluring to Dipper example of masculinity. I was like, that will tell that story. That'll help tell that story. And we had one of our writers, really funny writer, Tim McKeown, do the first draft of it, and he came up with a lot of great jokes. And a lot of the jokes you see right here with Stan at the table, that opening this scene with, do you have this in another animal? That's a Tim McKeown joke, killer joke. And it was a funny script. But I looked at the story and I suddenly had this feeling of, like, I think that the tone of this is not the tone of Gravity Falls. Like, that this is too far away, that the magic is so silly and so ungrounded, and you've just got these monsters walking around in broad daylight. Like, I thought this is a show about urban legends, not a show about just, like, pro wrestler cow monsters walking around and calling each other bro. And I was freaked out. And I did a pass of the draft where I was trying to ground certain elements a little bit, but I remember, like, when the episode came back in animation, like, I had a little freak out, like, oh no, I screwed it up. This isn't the show I wanted to make. Burn it down. And
wow.
And I remember there was a little bit of the sort of back and forth in the writers. You know, I remember so far as going to the executives and being like, can we just, like, not air an episode? Can we just, like, not play it?
It got to that point.
In my heart at the time,
yeah,
I had a different idea of what I dreamed Gravity Falls would be, and I was like, this isn't it. This isn't it.
Yeah.
And, you know, when it came out, it was fine. And I recently went back and watched it, and it's, like, got some great jokes in it.
Yeah,
it's very
it's so
sweet.
fun.
Dipper and Baba became something the fans loved.
Disco Girl.
Disco Girl is something the fans loved. And, like, you know, we're living in a time where there is massive cultural upheaval about how to be most sensitive and useful and progressive about conversations about gender. And this episode was written just a few years ago, but practically in another world when you consider those types of conversations. And I was a little scared to go back and watch it, like, oh no, like, did we make a point or suggest something that felt, you know, really out of step with the modern moment? And going back and watching it, it
doesn't at all.
It feels funny, it feels sweet, the heart feels in the right place. And, you know, I would take any critique if someone had it, but watching this, I was like, you know what? Like, the whole thing basically reads as a gentle-hearted critique of toxic masculinity.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like,
Dipper rejects it.
And Dipper rejects it. And so, like, I think it's, like, going back on it, like, I'm chill about it. And, like, this was one of these things where you don't know what you're making until you've made it.
Yeah.
You have an idea in your head of what it is, and then you watch it later, and, like, I think all the things I wanted Gravity Falls to be, at certain moments it was, and at other moments it was something else that was also fun.
Yeah.
So when I mention, like, that this used to be my most hated episode, I don't mean to disrespect the things about it that are good or the people who worked hard on it. It had to do with like,
You're,
how do I reach this vision I have?
Yeah.
And have I betrayed that vision? And it's always, what you create is going to be this interesting mix of the thing that was in your gut and all these other factors, right? And you'll create something that you couldn't predict, but that's also what's really cool and exciting about making something and making TV. And it's probably good that I didn't have more control, because I'm like, going back, I'm like, this is a lot of fun.